Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Tuesday, everybody. I'm filming this in a different location today. There's a bit of an echo. My apologies in advance if this is distracting. China is currently preparing for the annual Spring Festival, also known as Lunar New Year or Chinese New Year, though this is politically incorrect outside of China, holiday period. This is the most important festival of the year within China and involves a massive migration involving tens of millions of people back to hometowns across the country. This is a strain on people and infrastructure alike in any given year, but this year the poor weather has proven to be especially disruptive. State-run The Paper, for example, reports that this is the worst bout of Spring Festival migration weather since the mess in 2008, a year which was infamous for shutdowns and disruptions to this migration caused by extreme weather. Over the weekend, the China Railway Wuhan Bureau Group said that it had planned to suspend the operation of 141 round trips due to the widespread snowfall and freezing weather being witnessed in the center of the country. State-run Xinhua writes, quote, "The recent suspension of train services can be attributed to the adverse effects of freezing rain and heavy snowfall, which have led to suboptimal conductivity of the railway overhead wires due to ice accumulation." End quote. Across the country, hundreds of roads have been closed due to snow and other poor weather conditions. If the situation worsens, we will cover it in greater detail later this week. Next up, the ultra-modern, strategically located city-state of Singapore has designated a naturalized Singaporean citizen born in Hong Kong, Philip Chan, as a politically significant person under the new Foreign Interference Countermeasures Act, FICA. The Hong Kong-born businessman, who manages the real estate investment arm of a copper conglomerate owned by Chinese billionaire Wang Wanyin, is the first person to be dealt with under the law, which empowers the authorities in Singapore to deal with foreign interference in domestic politics. In a statement, the Singapore government said it has been assessed and that the gentleman's activities, quote, "are directed towards a political end in Singapore and that it is in the public interest for countermeasures under FICA to be applied to Chan," end quote. As a designated politically significant person, Mr. Chan would have to make annual disclosures to the authorities of political donations of $10,000 or more that he has received and accepted. Quote, "Singapore has historically been very sensitive to CPC influence efforts in the country, and this is a sign of how concerned they must be about growing CPC influence in the state." End quote. Singapore, with its own rich and complex heritage of ethnic and national identity, is on the front line of PRC influence operations in the ethnically Chinese diaspora, and the challenge of where to draw the line between pride in one's cultural heritage and disloyalty to one's country. Approximately 75.9% of the citizenry and permanent resident visa-holding population are ethnic Chinese. However, there is substantial sub-ethnic, linguistic, historical, and ideological diversity within this group. In a piece published today called "Beijing Steps Up Efforts to Co-opt Diaspora to Tell China's Story Well," Singapore-based outlet The Straits Times writes, quote, "According to the International Organization for Migration, a United Nations agency, there are an estimated 60 million people of Chinese origin overseas. As China seeks to expand its global influence and secure its interests amid increasing pushback from the United States and other countries, co-opting the Chinese diaspora has gained urgency. In recent years, its diplomats, state media, and citizens have been encouraged to tell the China story well. As Beijing wrestles for control over a discourse it said is dominated by Western liberal nations. Veteran diplomat Ong Kang-yong, who is also executive deputy chairman of the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies, said the ease of doing business and operating among foreign corporations and organizations via Singapore has emboldened Chinese companies and entities to use Singapore to reach out to others in the region and beyond. From this perspective, efforts have been made to cultivate relevant opinion makers and policy people. The idea is to have a PRC-friendly constituency, said Mr. Ong. A former senior Singapore diplomat said pro-China and anti-America sentiments among Singaporean Chinese, especially those aged 70 and over, have become more pronounced, especially since Xi Jinping's appeal to all ethnic Chinese, including those overseas, to love and be loyal to China, he said. These have included even former members of parliament, said the retired envoy, who asked not to be named because of political sensitivities. He added, non-Chinese racial groups in Singapore have begun to react to this brazen display of Chinese chauvinism, albeit mostly private resentment thus far. This will grow out of hand if not contained. Imagine how our Chinese and Indians would react if there was an outbreak of hostilities between China and India. End quote. This is a question many Western nations, which have seen large numbers of migrants from the PRC in recent decades, may need to grapple with too, especially if tensions between the West and China continue to escalate. Singapore is grappling with it now. Quote, if too many Chinese Singaporeans are foolish enough to subscribe to Xi's version of the Chinese dream, the multiracial social cohesion that is the foundation of Singapore's success will be destroyed. It cannot be put together again. End quote. Next up, the Chinese economy. But quickly, if you're enjoying today's episode of China Update, I have a huge favor to ask. Liking and subscribing. It's only 2 clicks of the mouse, but it is the primary way in which this channel grows. In fact, it is pretty much the only way it will be shown to new people. And for those who want to help me keep China Update financially sustainable, the channel relies primarily on subscriber support. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Next up, and finally for today, we move to the Chinese economy. Logan Wright with US-based Rhodium Group this week published a new note on China's economy. These notes are usually excellent and insightful, and this latest one is no exception. The report is called Beijing's Silence is Deafening. We end today's video by examining some of the piece, which is worth doing so at length, and we are now quoting selected excerpts from the piece directly. The recent liquidation of Evergrande and the uncertainty over measures to support the equity market merely add to a growing list of pressing economic problems where Beijing has either punted or is refusing to announce any actions they are actually taking. The fact that there has been no third plenum meeting on economic reform held or even announced marks another meaningful change from past practice. This is not normal for China or for any government struggling with a burgeoning crisis of confidence at home and abroad. The list of economic problems in which markets are waiting for concrete technocratic plans from Beijing is long and growing. In addition to the flagging equity market, the following issues beg for some form of policy clarity from Beijing. 1. Unfinished property construction. The Evergrande liquidation naturally raises the question of whether or not Beijing was interested in proposing a more constructive solution that would unlock new sources of funding to complete unfinished properties. 2. Local government debt. China's local government debt issues are obvious to all, including Beijing, and the Central Financial Work Conference was supposed to address proposals for restructuring the stock and existing debt, which could be as high as 100% of GDP, while also proposing new financing mechanisms for local government infrastructure investment in the future. But after the conference itself was delayed for over a year, and then longer into late October 2023, absolutely no concrete measures for debt restructuring were publicly announced. 3. Fiscal capacity. China's local government debt problem has its roots in China's system of revenue sharing between central and local government. Tax revenue continues to decline relative to the size of the economy because most taxes derive from China's investment-led growth model, not consumption-led growth or services activity. But there has been no plan announced to resolve or improve these imbalances in favor of local governments, nor to unveil new taxes to raise revenue. 4. Household consumption. China has seen a very modest recovery in consumer spending after the end of COVID restrictions, as there was no concrete policy support from Beijing for household incomes, while employment prospects weakened throughout the pandemic years. The question of when China's long overdue transition to consumption-led growth will finally occur remains unanswered, even when the limits to investment-led growth are apparent. 5. Asset management companies and managing bad debt. If there is a plan to eventually manage the growing pool of non-performing assets within China's financial system, no one seems clear on what it is. 6. Capital outflows and exchange rate management. As US interest rates are likely to stay above Chinese interest rates for several years, China will face long-term outflows of capital from its financial system. As Chinese households and corporations will diversify savings into foreign assets, this will create depreciation pressure on China's exchange rate and will eventually exhaust the People's Bank of China's capacity for intervention, although this could be many years in the future. Capital controls may slow or manage this flow, but will not ultimately reverse these trends. Now, why is Beijing being silent on its policy plans to deal with all of these? The article proposes several explanations. 1. The centralization of authority under Xi Jinping. 2. An anti-corruption campaign in the financial industry and among regulators has killed policy initiative among officials. 3. There are no good or easy ideas, so we are doing nothing. 4. An inexperienced new economic team. 5. Bureaucratic roadblocks. 6. This is the plan. Cover up the problems and pretend nothing is wrong. Then, after several pages of discussion, the note makes its conclusions. Beijing's silence may be explicable for any one of our reasons, or some other reasons we have not considered. Foreign investors are not owed an explanation of Chinese policymakers or the reasoning behind it, but in the past Beijing has tried to publicly provide the rationale for economic policy changes in order to encourage inbound investment flows. But most importantly, silence itself is a policy choice, and it will lead to more reactive economic policy making in the future, with Beijing waiting for episodes of financial stress to finally respond. Leaving local government debt risks and fiscal constraints unresolved will simply slow local government investment and economic growth further. Leaving other non-performing loan issues unaddressed will contribute to zombified banks, unable to finance more productive private sector activity in China's economy. These problems will not disappear on their own, even if Beijing would prefer to change the subject of the global conversations about China's economy. Here ends the direct quote and today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a wonderful Tuesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.